Maurice Ravel was one of music history's greatest perfectionists. He lavished extreme detail on his scores. When asked at one time if he would write an orchestration textbook because he was the leading master of his day at orchestration, he responded that of course not, he wouldn't. But what he would do is write a book that exposed all of the mistakes he made. And today I'd like to look at Maurice Ravel's perhaps biggest mistake. It's in his most well-known piece, Bolero. And of course, by the fact that I have a saxophone here, we're going to be talking about the saxophone parts in Bolero. Now, Bolero is, by Ravel's own admission, not a fantastic piece of music. It's rather repetitive. In fact, that's the whole nature of the piece, is its repetition. Bolero scores for 3 saxophones played by 2 players. Now, it's pretty straightforward with the tenor saxophone part, which I've got here. And I'm going to go ahead and play the tenor sax solo. This is the first solo that you hear out of the saxophones. So that solo is pretty straightforward. Now, the next phrase is where it gets interesting. As I said, Ravel scored for 3 saxophones played by 2 players. The next solo, he split between 2 instruments. It's the exact same notes, only up 1 octave. So the natural thing to do would just have the same thing be played on a soprano sax 1 octave higher. In fact, they can read off the same music. And in fact, that's actually what happens in most performances. But that's not what Ravel did. He splits it between a sopranino sax and a soprano sax. What makes it even more confusing is Ravel scores for sopranino saxophone in F. Now here is where Ravel makes a huge mistake. As far as anybody knows, sopranino saxophone in F has not ever existed. It is a mythological beast. It's a minotaur, or a sprite maybe, since it's so small. And this myth goes all the way back into the early days of Adolphe Sax's patent on the saxophone, in that he says he could make instruments in both E flat and F, as well as B flat and C. And the idea of the F instruments perpetuated, particularly through books. Berlioz talks about it in his treatise on instrumentation. This gets transferred over to Vidor and other texts of the day, which Ravel would have read, but he didn't have a lot of first world knowledge of the saxophone to know that a sopranino was never in F. What's interesting about this is that the idea of the F sopranino takes off, and it gets included in other books after Bolero because Bolero is so popular. The most famous of these is Sam Adler's The Study of Orchestration, where in every volume, every edition of it, he talks about the sopranino being in F, whereas no such instrument exists. So what do players do? Well, the majority of players are going to play the second solo on soprano the whole way through and leave it at that. It's pretty straightforward, and the only reason that it switches off is because the solo goes out of the range of the sopranino. So Ravel made a big mistake here. And we know that Ravel made a mistake because we actually have an interview by Marcel Moulet, who is the grand matron of French saxophone playing. In fact, he was the first professor at the conservatory in Paris after Adolphe Sax himself. And Moulet was the first saxophonist to play Bolero. And he gets the part on his stand at the premiere, and he looks at sopranino in F. And Moulet was too shy to go up to Ravel and say, Maestro Ravel, this instrument doesn't exist. And so he just quietly sat back, played his part on soprano. Nobody knew the wiser. Ravel probably didn't even know that he had played it all on soprano. This is in Ravel's latter days when his mental state was starting to decline. This could be one reason for the inclusion of an instrument that didn't exist. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play the Bolero solo on soprano sax, and then I will play it on sopranino sax. So that's what it sounds like on the soprano sax. No changing instruments. Now, I'm going to play the solo on sopranino sax, because I just happen to have one here. Of course, this is a sopranino sax in E flat. And that's where Ravel leaves off and switches it over to the soprano. Though I can play a little bit further. And I have one more note that this instrument just won't play, but I can. I can leg stop it to get an A on here. It'd be kind of nice to have a low A sopranino, wouldn't it? But yeah, so Ravel made a huge mistake. Wrote for an instrument that didn't exist, and it didn't even need to be used because the highest note, even on an E flat sopranino, is just a written B flat. In the F part, it reads as a written A flat. Well, on soprano, that's just an E flat above the staff. That's like an all-day long note for a good soprano player. That's, you know, nothing. There's no altissimo in it, so you don't even need this little wee beastie here. So yeah, that's the story of Ravel's biggest orchestration mistake, writing for an instrument that doesn't even exist. So I'm going to be trying to come with more regular videos where, well, you know, I talk about some of these oddities in orchestration and instrument history. Let me know what you think, and if you have any suggestions for other orchestration oddities, let me know. And maybe I'll do an entire video on the sopranino sax. I haven't really done one of those. I did years ago, but it's deleted and nobody can see it anymore. But anyway, until next time. Oh, and Always, big thank you to all my Patreon supporters. They're listed in the end credits. So thank you so much.